Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your spending your lunch hour with us, and we hopefully will give you an interesting and informative conversation. And we'll certainly have time left over at the end for any questions that you may have. I'm not going to give a long background or preamble here. I just want to dig in and get to the conversation. The way that this is structured is traditionally we bring two interesting thought leaders from the scholarly communication space together, and we have a dialogue about topics of the day and where we think the industry is going. And as I said, our hope is that there'll be questions from the audience as we conclude, and people can participate in the discussion. So with that said, I'm really pleased to have two leading voices from within our community here with us today. Lorraine Haricombe is the Dean of the University of Kansas Libraries, a member of the ARL, and they serve more than 25,000 students and 1,300 faculty. She's one of the founding members of the Coalition of Open Access Policy Institutions, and she serves as the Provost Designate for Open Access Implementation at the University of Kansas. She's done a number of very interesting things in the space. She's chair of the SPARC Steering Committee. She's a member of the ARL AAU Task Force on Scholarly Communication, and she serves on PubMed Central's Advisory Committee. Before she came to KU, which was in 2006, she was the Dean of the Libraries at Bowling Green, and she holds doctoral and master's degrees in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And to my right is William Gunn. William is the head of academic outreach for Mendeley, which is, as you know, a leading research management tool for collaboration and discovery. He received his PhD in biomedical science from the Center for Gene Therapy at Tulane University in 2008. He subsequently left academia and established the biology program at Genolite, which was a novel diagnostic startup. And from there, he moved to Mendeley to, as he puts it, pursue his mission of bringing modern network efficiencies to academic research. So these are our speakers, and we're just going to dig in. I have given them a few questions to think about, but this is an unscripted conversation. We'll see where it goes. Lorraine, I'll start with you, and we'll talk about first, what do you think are the biggest issues facing the scholarly communication space in the next coming 2 to 5 years, let's say?
Thank you, first of all, and thank you all for coming and spending your lunchtime with us. Having walked this walk and in this space, I think the issue of education and outreach, especially to our faculty, will continue to be a major issue and perhaps a challenge in that way. I think it is we've come a long way, I think, in the development and the maturation of open access, but there's still a lot of work to do. 10 years into the space, we've seen a lot of progress in terms of open access policies. We've seen a lot of open access journals. We've seen infrastructure put into place, but not everybody is embracing open access fully yet, and especially, and I come from a campus environment where we have walked the walk, and even at a place like University of Kansas, considered in many places a leader in this space, we still have some challenges in this space. So I think the education and the outreach and engagement of faculty in this conversation will remain a challenge probably for a long time, despite the progress that we have seen over the last 10 years. I think there's also an issue of embracing it at the university level. Most of these policies that we've seen have been developed by faculty. But it is important for universities to embrace this. I think the importance of open access policies is what will drive a maturation of the issues towards the end game here. And I don't think we've seen enough university administrations in particular, embrace open access here. We all know that universities have budget issues. We all know that universities are held more accountable by the legislatures and by funders. And I think that is going to be a challenge for us to make sure that they understand the benefits of open access in that budgetary constraint, and especially in the accountability to the very people who pay, especially at public universities, the tax dollars that fund the research that's going on at those institutions. Society depends on universities. Societies need to be informed of the research and the scholarship that happens at the institutions where they pay for that tax, for that research to happen.
And William, the same question to you. So over the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years, the biggest issues facing scholarly communication?
Well, I'd have to agree that open access is a big issue. If I was to put out a couple of issues that kind of on a timeline of, let's say, already full-blown and on their way, and maybe just starting to get a toehold, and things that are not yet there but maybe will be there, it would be getting the manifestation of these mandates put into practical terms, getting the communications out, ideally through the scholarly societies, to all of the researchers, so that they understand, what they need to do, why they need to do it, how to do it, all of these kinds of things. And then what comes up after that, and is already starting to take hold a little bit, is this concept of, well, so we have all of this material out there. Now, who's using it and what are they doing with it? And this whole, the field of altmetrics basically is something that is near term, and libraries are going to have to think about what they're going to do with it, how they can use it to understand their patrons, understand what's happening with their content, understand their constituencies. Publishers, I think, already very much understand the need for this, and they're putting things into place to provide that as a service for authors. And then I think, when we have this idea of what sort of attention is being paid to these, to all of the content that's out there, the question is, well, if we have a measure of an attention that's being paid to a document, what is that reflective of? Is it reflective of just the article being, of broad popular interest, of being very controversial, or is it actually somehow, is there a measure of, this is a finding that represents a very, very important bit of scholarly work that can be used to come up with a transformative discovery to move the field forward, that kind of thing. And so that the buzzword around that is essentially is reproducibility. People have known for a long time that reuse is a very, very important definition for how open a bit of content is, and reproducibility, I think, fits right along in line with that. So to me, all these things are kind of in a continuum.
So as we have more content that is available, and we have more ways to measure how that content is used, understanding what that means, understanding what that use and reuse means, and the measuring sort of what is good about that reuse, or what is valuable about that reuse. Right,
and there's been several projects to look at the qualitative side of this. So understanding, okay, if somebody is tweeted about your paper, that's great, but who was it? Was it a Nobel Prize winner, or was it a grad student in your lab? Where does that kind of fit, bringing that reputation layer into things? So there's been some work, a draft, altmetrics standard, kind of along the lines of Counter, that we're working with Todd Carpenter at NISO and some of those people on maybe putting that together. Maybe it's early days for that yet. And then the other bit of work that recently just started is with the, we're working with the Center for Open Science on this reproducibility project. So we recently got funding to actually replicate the findings of the 50 most high impact cancer biology papers that have come out in the past 3 years. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of which of these attention metrics correlate, positively or negatively with the actual reproducibility of the finding. So I think there's a lot of neat, layers that are coming into this.
So both of you touched on specifically open access, the notion of access generally. What's the state of open access today? Where is it, and where is it headed?
I'll jump in here. I think we're at a healthy place. 10 years in, let me just say that the beginning of open access was, the seed was planted when we tried to reshape scholarly communication because of the serials crisis many, many years ago. And that was really the genesis that started this whole conversation. Now it's moved to open access, where we have an ideal end game of free, immediate access to everybody, to anybody, not just access, but also reuse. We've come a long way since then. So I think we're in a very healthy space. If we take a look 10 years ago when the Budapest Open Access Initiative was started in 2002, that was the first global definition of what open access is. We have since seen the Directory of Open Access Journals with more than 10,000 open access journals now. We have built infrastructure. Institutional repositories abound around the globe. We've seen more and more open access policies, not just in this country, but all around the world. Growth of maturation of open access, and a lot of work ahead of us still, but I believe that we're in a good spot, and this conversation at this conference here, where we are talking and interweaving open access as part of the conversation, to me is another great indicator of how far we've come in libraries in particular, because we're representing libraries here mainly. But my view would be that we're in a very healthy spot with more advocacy work to do. SPARC is in a great spot to do that for us with help from others. We have seen now at the national level the White House directive, which was issued in February as an executive order, and we are seeing the FASTR legislation, FASTR, that was also introduced in the House and in the Senate in February as indicators of moving the conversation to the national level, away from the individual institutions, at least in this country. So I think as we move forward, it's important for us to make sure that we get to FASTR legislation fast before the Obama administration leaves the House, because I think that's where we can make sure there's legislation to protect what we're trying to do today.
And I'll give the same question to you, which is the state of open access today and where it's headed.
Yeah, well, I would have to agree that it certainly seems like with the mandates and things that are working on all around the world, it's really quite the state of rude health. I think the serials crisis, you correctly note that that was the seed for all of this. It's where a lot of the library motivated push for open access came from. For me, it's interesting. I didn't come out of the library world. The way I got interested in open access was wanting to be able to do the kinds of things with scholarly content that I could do with blog posts or music or whatever else. And so now working in a technology company, I think there's a push, there's an equal drive towards open access so that products can work well together. So you can build value-added services on top of the content layer. In the session we were in earlier today, Jeffrey Lancaster was talking about this service, if then that kind of, if something happens on this one service over here, you can pipe it into this other service and call something else to happen. All of these things can only happen because all of those services have APIs that can talk to one another. And I would love to have the same kind of thing happen in the scholarly literature. Like if somebody publishes on this given topic, then alert me and my colleagues, or automatically add this document to this group, right, or things like that. So I think there was a financial drive originally, and now that more and more communication is becoming digital and becoming on the web, now there's a technological imperative to make this stuff open so we can actually do the real value-added stuff on top of the content.
So not just open access in the sense of free to read, but actually free to build on top of, free to use, free to mine, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the true open access.
Lorraine, back over to you. So this question is to what extent is it the library's role to advance a greater embrace of openness among the research community versus letting that demand build up organically? In other words, on campus, how proactive should the library be in promoting these issues?
I personally think the libraries are in a great position to advance conversation, engagement, and education of open access. I'll be the first to say that libraries perhaps is not the best position to initiate open access on campus in the way that we see the policies developed by faculty-led committees, but that we certainly have a role in that. And I say that for a couple of reasons. I believe libraries have trust capital. I think we can all agree that faculty love libraries and librarians. They don't believe a librarian can give them a wrong answer. They love them. So we should leverage that. We do this already in our liaison structures that we have around campuses when we work, whether it's acquiring content, whether it's instruction, whether it's in embedded librarianship. We have great relationship with perhaps not all of the faculty, but with many of them. So we have infrastructure in place for that. Many of us have distinctive competencies that nobody else on a campus has. We know how to organize information. We know how to build discovery layers. We understand how to organize and process and access and make information discoverable. So it's another good reason why I think libraries should be involved. A third one is that for many of the campuses where we have IRs, they mostly run in or by the libraries. Many of us are scholarly communication librarians. It's a new, relatively new position. It's not a decade old. So there's an expertise there that I think we should leverage. We understand policy. We work with copyright regularly. We understand those issues. So infrastructure, expertise, understanding policy and engagement and education, I believe, are distinctive competencies that libraries bring to this space. That's very helpful to support faculty who may be interested in developing those open access policies. On our own campus, just to mention KU per se, the policy was not advanced by the libraries, but the libraries had the IR in place. We were fortunate that we had a provost at the time by the name of David Schulenberger, who was very active in this space. So we come from a long history, 20-year history almost, of building where we are today. So we're still standing on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. But it was the faculty in 2008, 2009, who led this, and in particular 2 or 3 disciples, strong disciples of open access who got it, and who had the good sense to adopt and co-opt 2 librarians onto that committee to help them. Because librarians could talk and knew how to discuss this also with faculty. So I would say that perhaps not to initiate it, but certainly a critical role in advancing it and continue to sustain this conversation on campuses.
What would you say to the perspective that taking on more of an advocacy role with respect to open access or just openness in general amounts to another unfunded mandate for libraries, another thing we have to do?
It certainly is for me. I know it is, but like everything else, we're expected to do more with less. It meant taking a very close look at what the priorities are, what the trends are, where the puck is going to go, and making sure that we're positioned for that. So it meant taking a position and recrafting, redrafting, and repositioning a librarian to now be a full-time scholarly communications librarian, for example, and finding other resources within my organization to support that work, because it's important work. It's priority, it's national, it's global. So to me, there's no maybe as to what we should be doing, and it's a matter of reviewing organizationally where we're going to invest our resources as priorities.
William, just to shift gears here, Mendeley has, I believe, a community of around 2.7 million researchers. What have you learned from working with such a large user base?
Well, I think the main thing that we've learned from having such a rapid adoption from such a large group of people in Mendeley was really the power of really, really useful, easy to use, drop dead simple user interfaces. kind of to put this in the context of institutional repositories, we have somewhere between 500,000 or 700,000 documents uploaded on a given day to Mendeley. Not unique, many of these are copies of one another, but compare that to the amount of submissions that even a large centralized repository gets, and it's pretty big. I think a lot of the way that we did that was by figuring out where there was a pain point in a research workflow, and sort of smoothing over that, and getting there so that we had we were out of their way, so to speak. We solved the problem and didn't get too much in their way, and so we really have all these things that we want to know about our audience, and that altmetrics researchers want to know about our audience. But at the same time, our whole thing has been, let's not get too much in their way. Let's solve their problems for them, and let them get back to doing their research, which is what they're there for. So I think, thinking about this came up when you were answering about the library question. One of the really interesting things that librarians do is they understand the policies, and researchers, they could care less about what the policy is or what the mandate is. They just want someone to tell them what to do, and to ideally do it for them, or for them not to worry about it. And so you guys are really well positioned for that. And I think if we could leverage somehow the engagement that we have on our platform to repositories, to mandate compliance and all that kind of stuff, it would be great. I think fundamentally what we've learned is that 2.7 million people, even if you get a small fraction of them doing something, you get a whole lot more than if you have to go individually, manually, one by one, and try to build that support.
You've had the opportunity, in a sense, to observe the researcher in his or her natural habitat from behind the bluff. Have you found anything interesting about the way that they virtually congregate, that they virtually collaborate? Has any of that interaction been unexpected from what your original thinking was?
There hasn't been very much that has happened that really has been entirely expected, Greg. I think we had this idea initially that we would have these social groups, and then people would join the groups, and they would add papers relative to like what their group was studying, these kinds of things. But we've seen such a broad, diverse use of the infrastructure and the platform to do all these kinds of things that we really hadn't expected. There are people that are using the groups as kind of like their own little proto-journal. They put things in there that they think are interesting, that they want people to read, and digitized manuscripts. The biodiversity heritage library is doing a lot of stuff, just kind of using us as a way to be a publication dissemination platform for some of the content that they have. So that was totally unexpected. We didn't really see that sort of thing coming. We haven't seen as much uptake as we'd really like of people posting like their papers on their profiles and disseminating that way. I would have thought that would have been one of the obvious things to do. We've seen a lot of recreational use, people making groups that are solely of papers with amusing funny titles. There's one that's just like it has the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study of parachute effectiveness, and all these other funny papers. So we've really seen that like there's a huge I guess unrealized, unmet, untapped demand for interaction with the scholarly literature, but it's not in the level of like what you would expect from like a journal club or normal scholarly discussion where you have a paper and then a bunch of people are talking about the merits of this paper. We're seeing it kind of being this, here's a place where, you know, a document exists on the web, and here are all these other things pointing at it, and here's this, you know, this pointer going out into this other conversation somewhere else on the web, you know. And that's, it's really been kind of inspiring to see that happen, but it was totally, you know, not on our radar from the beginning.
Lorraine, back to and digging deep into your CV. In 1998, you co-edited a book, and it was entitled "Creating the Agile Library." And the book argued that libraries had to grow ever more agile in adapting technologies to serve their users. So that's 15 years ago. And with this remove, how do you think libraries could more efficiently use technology today to facilitate research and discovery among their patrons?
Okay, 15 years ago, I can't even remember what I said then. Sounds like a whole lifetime away. Well, one of the things that come to mind as I think of us in our profession as librarians is the notion to support faculty researchers, to enhance their research, to enrich their teaching. Those are all very mission-driven types of activities that we do in libraries. So for researchers, I think with the advancement of technology and with the availability of different tools and so on, saving time, you know, helping them be more productive so that they can generate the research and the discoveries that we all rely on are key in my mind. And with so much more technology available, developing the tools and providing, you know, education and support in how to use those things. So very basic ones that come to mind is EndNote. We provide classes and we provide desk-side coaching to people. EndNote, RefWorks, you know, Mendeley is another example. You know, there's a host of technologies that will just make it easier for them not to have to leave their laboratory to go to the library to do something, but to have it all together, either on their screen or at least close by, if not the librarian doing it, you know, for them. We talked earlier about having open access grow organically versus the library advancing this, sort of ties to this. When we first started engaging our faculty, we tried to teach them how to upload their works into our IR. Wrong idea, totally wrong idea, and I think I see head shaking. We adopted a mediated suite of services where you can just send your CV to us and we'll check the policies, we'll analyze it on the website, and we will upload it immediately and directly for you. So that you don't have to worry to do one more thing. We will do it for you, and if there's a policy issue, we'll come back to you and ask you for a manuscript of something. So there's LibGuides. There's just a host of technology now that we can employ and help them understand how to use it to be much more productive than they might otherwise be.
So how, there's a, as you said, there's a proliferation of these tools. There's new technologies, new collaboration tools, new productivity tools, new networking tools. How does the library stay abreast of or ahead of these new technologies that researchers either are using or should be using? I mean, how do you drink from that fire hose?
Tough question. There's so much out there, and if you have a top-notch IT team perhaps in your library and who is ready and go out, it's a different role and a different responsibility. Obviously, if you don't have a top-notch team and an IT team, you would hope that it's not just the IT people, I think librarians, there's probably some new roles and responsibilities here to begin to think how you would do different work or do work differently when you engage with researchers, understanding what they need, engaging with them in terms of their research field. It's always a good thing to have expertise in the field of the research, but understanding what the new research is out there, understanding what their particular needs are is a major benefit. And you get that by getting out of the library, by engaging them, you know, in the committees where they are, in the grant application process, etc. These are all new types of roles. Perhaps not for everybody, but certainly emerging roles for for librarians, the data librarian, working with a researcher to help discuss or develop a data management plan, etc. Metadata librarian, understanding what it is that they need to describe, the deliverable, etc. These are ways that we can stay abreast, may not entirely, but the communication needs to be two-way, and perhaps being proactive, not waiting for the researcher to come and ask for the question, but to anticipate the question by reading what's going on in the field, understanding where the research is going. I just attended a very fascinating session by PLOS on ALMs, and using that tool to engage with research at a very different level and in a very different way than I had heretofore thought we might do. And I was very excited to see new ways of thinking about engaging and being embedded with researchers or faculty.
So William, a similar question to you. How do you think scholars could more efficiently use technology to further their research?
Well, obviously, I think that there is a lot of things you can do with technology to make your work better. I think you have to. It can be hard sometimes, especially if you're a procrastinating grad student, to get away from technology for technology's sake, and to use the things that actually make your work better. That's one place where honestly I think libraries have a really strong role to play, is knowing what the good services are, knowing how they serve your faculty's needs, being able to recommend to them, okay, this is a really good service to use to host an online profile or to do research discovery, but this over here that's not really got that much traction, and maybe this, maybe you don't need to spend too much time going over in this area, and kind of the discipline-specific needs and all of that. I was struck in the earlier presentation that I was giving that kind of what we've done with Mendeley, think about it in terms of having instrumented the research process. We have in a way kind of embedded Mendeley in the researcher's workflow so that we're understanding of the researcher's needs more so that we can provide to them better services. I wonder, it hadn't occurred to me until I heard Jeffrey talking about how he tries to do that with his faculty, and you hear about embedded librarians, and I'm like, so we have a bit of software that's doing a lot of the very similar kinds of functions. How can this serve as a model for for improving? How can we bring in librarians into Mendeley and have them help us do a better job at what we're doing? So I think speaking from with my researcher hat on, what I really wanted out of all of this was to spend less time writing and more time doing research, less time looking for papers, more time reading them and thinking about the next experiments. So leveraging that collective power is one thing that's a really powerful concept. If you think about it, there's got to be 100 or 200 or maybe 1,000 people out there in the world that are interested in a similar topic as you and have collected a collection of papers on a similar topic to yours. Wouldn't it be nice if you could say, okay, so I'm interested in this this topic, and I've got this paper, and this paper on it. Show me some other papers that I should probably have. And so we built a tool to start doing that for people. And I think that's taking the time, the manual time, especially the repeated effort in a lot of cases, out of all of this, and moving it to where there's more time spent publishing papers, less time spent writing them. There's more time doing research, less time spent out there looking for it and trying to stay on top of the literature, which is just impossible these days. There's more. We've now reached this really critical tipping point where nobody can keep on top of all the literature in all of their fields. I mean, I don't care how niche your field is. There's going to be more out there than you can keep in touch with, and so you have to depend on what we're starting to call social filters.
So is there a similar follow-up question to what I asked Lorraine? Is there this secondary threat where you have all this content, it's hard to keep track of it, it's a bit overwhelming, but the number of tools and resources that you could choose from to help with that filtering, there are an overwhelming number of those as well?
Right.
Is that a concern?
I don't think it's necessarily a concern right now. There's always going to be in any field where there's a lot of interest, where there's a lot of unsolved problems, where there's a lot of work that can be, done on behalf of someone and value to be added, there's going to be a lot of people trying to solve that problem if it's valuable enough. And I think that's where we are right now. Eventually right now we have a whole bunch of different services to do specific bits of things, but eventually those are all going to converge on the certain activities that people want done. Discovery as a service, commenting, review as a service, and we're seeing, like rubric and these things come up as services. I think they're all going to converge and there's going to be a shakeout. But quite honestly, I'd be concerned if there wasn't a whole lot of people that are out there.
Delving back into your biography a little bit, William, so you studied gene therapy at Tulane, and you earned your PhD there. So you're a recovering bench scientist at this point. So what do you see as the ideal relationship between the library and the individual researcher?
So yeah, from my point of view, I almost never went into the library. It wasn't a part of my I used library services all the time, of course, right? But it wasn't something that I thought about. It wasn't necessarily on my radar. It was where I directed a lot of my frustrations about the scholarly communications process was, to the library, because they were my first point of contact. So I would really like to see a lot more of a two-way street in that, go on there, because you were right earlier, Lorraine. Librarians really picked up the open access ball and ran with it for a long time, and dragged the faculty along with them for most of the way down the field. And now when you get in the, almost at the end zone, the faculty want to pick up the ball and cross the end zone, and that's great as long as we get to where we're going, but, I think librarians could be more embedded into the research process of researchers, understanding more of what they need, more specialized, as well as researchers should get out and understand more of, what the library has to offer. And certainly, relative to the question you asked just before, the libraries are a place where they can go and find out, how can I use all of these different, dizzying arrays of technologies more to my benefit? How can, I've got these mandates, there's all of these confusing, conflicting, rules and regulations. What do I need to do? Can you, figure this out for me? And so I think there's definitely a lot of value to be had from researchers talking to librarians and librarians talking to researchers.
So same question to you. What's the ideal relationship between the librarian and the individual researcher?
There's probably I don't know how to define ideal. If I ask each one of you, you'd probably have a very different opinion of what is ideal. For me, it's on a continuum. For some people, it will be what they get today. It may be just a book that they want or get an answer to the reference question. And if that is good or right or help advance whatever it is they're doing, that to them is ideal. All the way to, wow, I had no idea the library can do this for me, which is more often the case. How many of you have worked with faculty and said, I had no idea you could do this for me. I wish I had known earlier, right? For those of you in the room here. So for me, understanding what the need is, that engagement, that two-way communication is critical to understand how you can address the needs for them, whether it's the subject expertise, whether it is being part of that team, whether it is being in the classroom, shaping, developing the course or the curriculum so that student learning outcomes could be better measured, whatever it is. It depends on in whose eyes you are ideal, I think. But I do believe that librarians we need to make more concerted efforts to promote and identify and articulate very clearly what we can do. We are so much more than books. I wish every time somebody pulled up a database and said, brought to you by your library, because I think sometimes the students just don't get it. And they don't think, just as you said, you didn't think it came from the library. You used the library. Nobody graduates from the library, but you use the library all the time, right? So I think making sure that they know, and I think the responsibility rests with us to make sure that we're proactive in that space to let them know what it is we can do, whether that's on our websites, whether that is through the embeddedness, whether that is through the liaison structures that we have, however we do this. And maybe do it and show it to them so that they can be wowed and understand that, you know, they can come to us for this. Libraries are such cultural icons. And I think the romantic notion of what a library and a librarian can do for you is something of a challenge for us, I think. People tend to not think of all these other exciting things that we can do. And it behooves us, I think, to very quickly get on board to show successful case studies of things that we had done and the impact of that on their teaching or on their research or on the student learning outcomes. I think those are the points where we can really make a difference in showing how ideal we can be for them. We hear this from students also.
Yeah.
You know, we had no idea until I was in my senior year, one student or several tell us that you did all this for me, and I wish I'd known it in my first and second year.
I can
Same
definitely
thing.
say, as a researcher, I would not have minded more contact from librarians. You know, I think maybe the idea was to, you know, let's not get in their way. You know, let's you know, focus on, you know, what we're good at. Or there was this, you know, you start class, you get kind of trotted through the library, and you get this sort of orientation, and that was it. But I really would not have minded a lot more contact if it was, hey, I know you're dealing with this particular issue, here's how we can help you with it. You know, I wouldn't have minded that at all.
I think we're going to probably see more of that with the White House directive, certainly with grants and researchers who are now going to have to comply. I think there's a very distinct role for librarians there, and we better get on board with, you know, what that role will be, the workflow, et cetera, et cetera. Increasingly, librarians and library deans are now calling on each other and said, what are you guys doing about share and chorus and, you know, this whole White House directive? And there's an undertone here of let's see who's going to start and what they're going to do first.
Right.
So there's a component of, on one end of the spectrum, being an information valet. I mean, sort of popping up when needed to provide whatever resources necessary, then going back to wherever you came from until they need you again. And on the other hand, it's sort of the information tax accountant, where there's all these crazy rules and regulations, all these forms to fill out, and how do I do that? I need a professional to help me.
Right.
And those are, obviously there are areas in between, but that's sort of the possible spectrum.
I don't know if marketing is the answer to it all. We've marketed. We've got a great marketing communications program, and many other schools do. People see what they see, but it's at the point of need when they really appreciate more what you do. So it is that one-on-one, and it's unfortunately a very challenging model because we don't have enough librarians for every researcher, obviously, but it seems to me that's the best way to get out there. And if we have that structure in place, you know, is prepare and equip our librarians to be a lot more active and confident in those roles.
My last question for each of you before we see if folks in the audience have areas they wanted to talk about is, what is one potential game changer in the scholarly communication space that we should be thinking about? And Lorraine, I'll start with you.
Well, I keep on thinking back to this ALM session that I attended earlier, and article level metrics, I think, to me comes to mind as the one area where we're going to get through to faculty who are really the people that we rely on to advance this open access, because they are the researchers making the discovery. So the impact of their work, a better understanding of the impact of their work through all these different tools, article level metrics in all its manifestations, I think may be the game changer, because every researcher wants to see the impact of their work, and right now they look at it in the best journal. It's by journal, it's not by the real impact of their particular work. Citations matter to researchers, and I think to the extent we can provide rich depth to their impact, you know, in all the shades of, not gray, I think it's going to be a game changer. I think the sooner we can get that, and the sooner we can get librarians to help in that space, to help highlight and show, the impact of that work, I think the sooner we'll get them to come on board in this end game of immediate open access to all.
And you feel like that is a game change in part because it will incentivize authors to think differently about where they choose to publish and how they choose to publish?
I think if it's published open, yes, because if it's immediately available, they can get more people than the review editors to look at their work. They can get input from even citizen scientists, if you will, ultimately. But hopefully it will also be a game changer in the promotion and tenure issue. For many of them, that's a big issue on campus, and open access is still sort of not fully embraced because in part of myths about peer review in open access. And I think once we can get to change that perception through impact stories of their research, I think we'll get there. It will take a little time, but I think we can get there. We have tools and we have a strategy.
Yep. So William, same question to you about game changer in the space.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked this question, and then I'll find out, 10 years from now whether I was wrong or right. But yeah, definitely I have to come down on the side of altmetrics too. I think it's currently, like if you think about it this way, open access has changed the game. Altmetrics is changing the game, and I think what's going to, change the game in the future is going to come as the next thing beyond altmetrics, bringing in this, again, the concept of a more qualitative dimension to what we currently have, which is mostly quantitative. So the interesting thing about the altmetrics right now is they're very atomic. So it's not like where you had the prestige kind of at the journal level. I published in this journal, or my monograph is published by this university press, therefore it's the, it has the impact that kind of is imbued to it from that. This impact is a lot more atomic. It's aggregated at the level of the article, which are the individual item might not be a published article. It might be, I wrote this bit of code to do this kind of research, and it's on GitHub, and a lot of people have forked it. That's an impact. Or, I have taught this course via Coursera, and 100,000 people signed up. There's all these kinds of other. When you start thinking about altmetrics, it really opens things up. Like you said, it very much does incentivize the practices that we want to see in scholarly communications. More open peer review. For too long, the peer reviews of articles have been like the scholarly dark matter. It happens, it has some effect on the output, but nobody ever sees that. It's totally lost to the broader community of scholars. And I think if someone could get credit for doing their review, if that was open and accessible on the web, like it can be with some of these new altmetrics frameworks, then they'll start doing more of that. And it really is going to change the game. What I think is neat about it is we already have metrics. People are already being assessed by their numbers. Chinese researchers are already getting bonuses for publishing in certain impact factor level journals, and so we might as well pick a metric that incentivizes the practices that we want to see, that promotes reuse, that anchors the definition of quality in something that matters to us, to what we care about, whether or not this work is, can be reproduced, which means, well, if they publish the paper, they have to have included their code, they had to make their data open, all these practices that we want to see, and that's just the prerequisite. You get that as a side effect for saying, we're going to use altmetrics that look at how well this item was reused. So I think it really has, a lot of potential to change the game in so many different ways. Atomizing it, adding layers of value on top of it, so many interesting things. And right now we're just in the quantitative, the descriptive phase. To get to where it changes assessment, I think we need to understand more about who's generating these metrics. Like I said before, like somebody tweets your paper, that's great. If it's a Nobel Prize winner, works in your field, that's probably even better.
Or if they're theoretically saying this is the worst paper I have ever read, there's a
Yeah, it could be
the
that
other
too.
thing about a citation, you don't know if somebody is
It's a good
citing your
negative.
paper because it was a method or because they didn't like it. So bringing that qualitative dimension into things. Well, that's where we need to get to be able to do the assessment with altmetrics. We don't want to make mistakes that we made in the past with kind of letting the impact, the journal impact factor, which was just intended to be a derived tool, end up driving the process, right?
And of course, through the life cycle, we'll have issues to do with gaming the system and jacking up your numbers and finding ways to inflate your value, as we do with every other metric.
Every other metric now, yeah. And the neat thing about having more than one metric to look at is you look at the correlations between the metrics. So if somebody has very low, numbers of citations and very low, there's no blog posts written about it. It wasn't mentioned in any news articles. But for some reason on Mendeley, it's been added to 1,000 of people's libraries. You have to wonder, okay, is this something really, really interesting this person is doing, or is there some gaming happening? And you can start to look at those correlations.
Well, that's all I had formally on my list of questions. I'm hoping that people will step forward and ask what might be on their minds, and we can get into a discussion as well. So if anyone does have a question, just raise your hand. We'll call on you, and you can shout it out. Please, sir.
I edit 3 commercially published peer-reviewed journals, and so I'm curious. When we talk about open access, and I was previously a dean for 23 years, went to faculty senate, got it all endorsed. But what is open access success? How do you define it? We all endorse open access. You spend quite a bit of time talking about open access. But when is open access successful? Is it dependent on whether Sherpa Romeo does gold, green, yellow? Is there a demarcation there? Is it simply faculty senate endorsement at a campus? Is it the University of California system where there is now for every site an open access policy? It must be gold or green. What are we aiming for? What is successful open access?
It's a fascinating question. I'll take first stab at it. There are any number of metrics that one could look at to say that success is building. The trend is towards success, meaning between 10 and 15% of journal articles now are open access, are gold open access. And that's a success because a few years ago it was 5%, so it's growing. But will we have quote unquote, or will open access have quote unquote made it when that number is 30%, 50%, 80%? I mean, we all have to choose our own definitions, right, in that sense. What certainly has been the case is for the 10 years or so that this has been an active movement, success has been defined as we got more this year than we did last year. We have more mandates, we have more gold open access journals, we have more institutional repositories, we have more green open access policies, so there's more. And so more is growing success. There's not, we're not sliding back. But at a certain point, you're right, just saying, well, we're doing more business than we did last year. That's not enough of a specific measure. And maybe having teed that up, I'll now turn it over to you to tell us what the number is.
Well, I don't know about numbers, but I was just thinking of the end game. The Budapest definition to me sticks. Free immediate online access, and now the use is being added here in this country anyway. That to me is what we headed, and that's what we aspire to have, so that everybody, irrespective of where they live, who they are, have access to this, whether it's in a third world country, a second world country, or in the first world country. Everybody will have access to that research, and it's a lot out there and so on. Mm-hmm. But there's also successful case studies. I will just throw out Jack Andraker's name to you, who openly said last week on national TV that had it not been for his ability to access this fundamental great research, he would not have been able to develop this measure of diagnosing pancreatic cancer, I believe, for 3 cents. He couldn't have done that. To me, that's an indicator of success of open access. It's a small one. It's a first one, perhaps, in a significant way, but to me, that's a very clear and a very high level indicator of success. So it doesn't have to be the 100%. I think what Greg just responded to was the building of successful measures. And I think that will probably go on for a long time. Who knows what the next big innovation will be thanks to open access? I can't speculate what that might be. We'll find out.
Yes, it's really all about the reuse. You know, did somebody get access to this item that wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and did they make some sort of, you know, transformative use out of that? Did they advance the field forward? Did they come up with an application for it? Did they you know, use it in an educational setting somehow when they wouldn't have been able to otherwise? You know, success to me is exactly the Budapest Declaration, you know, free, immediate online access to published journal articles. Progress towards that is success. The whole reason that we're doing this, let's not forget, is so that we can have a scholarly communications world that functions, you know, as well as the web does for communicating information to one another, right? As openly and as freely and as many different forms and as flexibly and as the web. That's really where we want to go to, something without those, something that does for scholarly communications what the web has done for other forms of kinds of communication. So anything that moves us towards that, I would say, is successful.
And I think this, I mean, I think Lorraine's point is about Jack and Reka is a good one in that this matters. This isn't just theoretical. I had the good fortune of participating in the Accelerating Science Awards program that PLOS and Wellcome and Google co-sponsored. And this was to say, to identify research that had benefited from open access publications to develop additional research, to follow on and to build something. And there were hundreds of applications where people, and you were involved too, hundreds of people said, we have benefited, we have used open access literature, and we have built upon it so that others can build upon what we do. So, you know, growing from 5 to 15 to 20%, those are important markers. The number of policies that different research funders adopt over time, those are markers. But there are also qualitative markers that we should be aware of as well. Next question.
People being blindsided in those ways?
I mean, I would challenge your suppositions. I mean, I can't say that scholarly communication didn't predict these things. I mean, if we're talking about there are 2 million articles that are being produced every year, I'd venture to say I could look back at 2005, 2006, 2007 and find one or more articles in economics journals. Right, so what consensus is a different story. It's difficult to achieve consensus when a lot of information is behind a paywall, so that's part of it. But academia it's not a monolith. It is a cauldron of ideas. And the vessel for disseminating that information is scholarly communication. It's journals and books and monographs and so forth. So I don't think there is an ideological intent behind those vessels. They're meant to publish interesting, important, good, well-documented research, whatever that research may say.
I think there has been actually a really big failing that you can point at to, at least in the field of biological sciences. And maybe the sciences overall. And the failing is that we're doing tremendous amounts of research and publishing tremendous amount of research that cannot be built upon, that's fundamentally irreproducible. And the reason that people are publishing these things are because, you know, all of the incentives in the scholarly communications infrastructure, the way we've set it up, at least in the life sciences, is around publishing highly novel findings, things that are going to get the editor's attention, that are going to, you know, the attention of readers, and they aren't around who's doing the most robust work, who's the most reusable work,
Negative
there's
results.
there's no really incentive. So so where we really drop the ball is in letting so much work, letting all of the incentives fall on the side of publishing novel stuff, not asking people, for example, to to show all of their data. You know, we're not in the print world anymore. We don't have space restrictions technically, right? Not making people share their code, you know, not asking people to, you know, to show all of their data, not asking them, you know, was this analysis done blind? Not bringing in statistical consultants to advise on whether or not the approach, the multiple testing approach they did was correct, whether they corrected for multiple testing at all, which a lot of times they don't even do. You know, in the clinical trials, they're starting to sort some of this stuff out. If you want to do a clinical trial, you have to register your trial first, and then you do the work, right? Think if people registered, you know, their hypothesis before they started collecting the data. It'd be a lot harder to do a bunch of work and then pick and choose from the pieces to make this kind of interesting narrative that is really the core reason behind why so much of what's published just can't be extended and built upon. I think that's a big problem. And, you know, journals are in a bad spot because if one journal stood up and said, hey, I want to start addressing this problem, I'm going to start rejecting these papers that, you know, don't meet all these guidelines, well, they can just send it somewhere else, you know. And so even papers that get really, really bad peer reviews, they all get published somewhere eventually, you know. So peer review has not, the way we do peer review right now has not served as the kind of filter that we want. So peer review has been, it's been necessary for the scholarly literature, but has not been sufficient for establishing a rigorous, trustworthy body of work that you can build on top of. It's just been a big failure.
Next question. Going once? All right, well, thank you both. It's a pleasure to be up here with you, and I really appreciate your spending the time, and thank you all for being here, and class dismissed.
Thank you.